name is Ramirez, and I'm a deep sea ecologist working at the National Institute for Water Research in Norway. My main research interests lie in understanding the effects of natural and anthropogenic change in deep sea ecosystems, and in particular in biodiversity and life histories of megafauna. In this lecture, I will talk about an important challenge faced by the oceans: the use of the marine environment as a dumping site. This striking photo by artist Frederic Kisianto summarizes perfectly the main problem of the marine dumping: the common belief that the oceans will make disappear, as if by magic, anything we dump in them. But just because we cannot see it, it does not mean it is not there. Because the deep oceans were once thought to be remote, featureless, and unstable areas, they have been considered and used as dumping sites for a variety of waste. Dumping in the seas and oceans was legally banned in 1972 by the London Convention, but large quantities of litter and chemical pollutants still reach the oceans today, often with unknown effects on the habitat and its fauna. In this lecture, I will first give a short overview of the different types of waste that have been dumped and are still dumped today in the deep oceans, and in the second half of the lecture, I will focus on 3 case studies that have investigated marine litter in the deep sea. But let me first start with a very brief description of the legal framework and actions that are in place in relation to waste and pollution of marine systems. The routine dumping of many types of waste from ships and other sources was legally banned by the Convention on the Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping of Waste and Other Matter, called the London Convention, and established in 1972. This was followed in 1996 by the updated protocol to the Convention, called the London Protocol. The London Convention and London Protocol are the primary international instruments to protect the world's oceans from pollution. Additionally, governments and international organizations are developing actions against litter and pollution in the oceans. For example, in 2008, the European Council and Parliament issued the Marine Strategy Framework Directive for the establishment of a framework for community action in the field of marine environmental policy. This directive requires that the European Commission defines criteria and methodological standards to allow consistency in the approaches to evaluate the extent to which good environmental status is being achieved. 11 qualitative descriptors for determining good environmental status have been defined, and marine litter is one of them. At the global scale, UNEP's Global Marine Litter Initiative is being developed by the Regional Seas Programme and the Global Programme of Action, and reports are available on their website. So I will now start a quick overview of waste and pollution in the oceans, beginning with sewage, dredge, and mining waste. An example of significant but localized sewage disposal was the deep water dump site 100 at 6 at about 2,500 meters on sedimentary slopes in the eastern United States. The site was used for the disposal of industrial and municipal waste between 1972 and 1992. At closure, this site had received 36 million tons of wet sewage sludge. The sludge contained silver and persistent organic pollutants, and studies have shown incorporation of sewage-derived organic matter by benthic deposit feeders, as well as significant faunal changes at the seabed. Following the cessation of dumping in 1992, there was an immediate improvement in local conditions, but indicators of pollution were still measurable at 75 kilometers downstream. Currently, there is no known dumping of sewage or dredge spoil in the deep sea. Regarding submarine mine tailing placement, I will only give a quick overview here, as this is the topic of another lecture in this series. According to a recent report by Craig Vogt, prepared for the International Maritime Organization, of the 2,500 industrial-sized mines currently operating, only about 0.6% discharge their tailings in water environments, including rivers and the marine system. And only a few countries, such as Indonesia, Papua New Guinea, and Norway, have active deep-sea tailing disposal programs. The basis for the deep-sea tailing placement is that the tailings are discharged at depth in areas where the topography and hydrography will ensure that a turbidity flow will be created, transported the tailings to a deep stable deposition area with no risk of upwelling or the tailings reaching the eutrophic zone. The potential effects of mine tailings on the marine community include, amongst others, hypersedimentation, toxicity from chemicals added during the ore processing, physical damage from grain angularity, and plume dispersal. Several research programs are currently investigating the effects of submarine mine tailing placement, and this is the topic also of a new DOSI working group formed in June 2014. Another type of waste that has been dumped in the ocean is low-level radioactive waste. Between 1949 and 1982, about 143,000 tons of low-level radioactive waste were dumped in the North Atlantic and North Pacific by different countries. The waste was packed in drums within a matrix of bitumen or concrete and dumped over the side of ships to deep water. The blocks were assumed to last for 1,000 years. Dumping was legally banned through the amendments to the London Convention adopted in 1993. Studies around the Northeast Atlantic showed no radioactive related to the drums. In the 1980s, an active program assessed the feasibility of high-level radioactive waste disposal in the deep sea. But political considerations stopped this program, and no international disposal of any radioactive waste occurs in the oceans today. However, highly focused sources of high-level radioactive waste are associated with accidentally sunken nuclear submarines. Knowledge of the environmental impacts of these sinkings is limited, but monitoring to date suggests that no significant environmental changes have occurred. Regarding pharmaceuticals, one of the main active disposal sites was the Puerto Rico Trench between 1973 and the early 1980s, when more than 387,000 tons of pharmaceuticals waste were dumped in the trench at 6,000 meters depth, at about 65 kilometers north of the island. Although monitoring of the dumping site is limited, in part because of the high depths, some studies have shown significant changes in microorganisms and amphipods of the affected area. At present, there is no disposal of pharmaceutical products in the deep ocean. However, certain pharmaceuticals used by humans and livestock, such as antibiotics, antidepressants, birth control pills, cancer treatments, and painkillers, have been detected in various water sources and may pose a threat to the marine environment. Some of these drugs are non-biodegradable and are mutagenic or carcinogenic. Thus, pharmaceutical wastes are an important issue for environmental management, but today few studies have been conducted on marine fauna and none on deep sea animals. Chemical contamination in the deep oceans does not come only in the form of pharmaceuticals. Although few studies are available, the recent increased sophistication of chemical analysis has shown that a wide array of chemicals from different sources are accumulating in deep sea sediments and benthic and midwater fauna. The major contaminants of concern are persistent organic pollutants, toxic metals such as mercury, cadmium, lead, and nickel, radioelements, pesticides, herbicides, and, as described in the previous slide, pharmaceuticals. Some xenobiotics, which are chemicals found in an organism that are not normally produced by that organism, are resistant to degradation, and deep sea sediments and fauna have been suggested as a final accumulation site for these man-made pollutants. In this graph, I show the results of a study conducted by Sam Koenig during his PhD project on chemical contamination of deep sea fauna in the Mediterranean Sea. The graph shows levels of total mercury in 12 deep sea fishes and the red shrimp Aristeus antennatus, caught at depths between 900 and 2,800 meters. The line indicates the maximum level of mercury allowed by the European Commission for seafood consumption. The results of this study worryingly show that all but one of the 13 species analyzed, including the highly commercial red shrimp, have mercury concentrations higher than the accepted EU limit. We now move to the sinking or dumping of large structures in the ocean. Ships have been lost since humans first took to the sea. During the 20th century, the loss of ships in the oceans was substantial. In particular, the sinking of ships was significant during the two World Wars. As an example, during the Battle of the Atlantic in World War II, More than 175 military ships were lost, and more than 3,500 merchant British ships were sunk, many of them in deep water. Towards the end of the last century, between 1970 and 1990, approximately 18 ships and 65,000 tons of shipping cargo sank on the high seas each year. The physical impact of wrecks is localized, and although poorly studied, wrecks may serve as suitable or preferred habitat for a variety of suspension-feeding organisms and their associated fauna in an otherwise sub-sediment environment. A well-documented example is the wreck of the Titanic shown in this photo, which has octocorals growing on the stern post and on chandeliers. Wrecks and lost cargo may have also a toxic effect on the local fauna through the degradation of metals, paints, and other material. A significant problem resides in ships containing munitions as well as in intentionally dumped munitions, which, through the corrosive effect of seawater, can release chemical pollutants. The impact of discarded or lost war material is difficult to assess. A pioneer study called Red Cod has been conducted in the Adriatic, showing that the fish analyzed had a significantly higher stress level, higher arsenic and mercury content, and gill DNA damage than fishes from non-affected areas. Lost or discarded munition causes also important problems to the local fishermen, who can bring back to surface explosive artifacts in their nets. Another recent waste that is being considered for storage on the deep sea floor is CO2. Again, I will only quickly describe the issue, as this is also a topic of another lecture in this series. The recognized increase in CO2 levels in the atmosphere and related climate change issues has resulted in the development of methods for the long-term disposal of greenhouse gases in subseabed reservoirs. Carbon dioxide forms a solid crystalline structure at appropriate temperature and pressure conditions. Thus, the injection of CO2 into suitable seabed structures, such as past and ongoing oil and gas reservoirs, should cause the CO2 to form hydrates and act as a long-term depository of excess CO2. The Llodra gas field in the North Sea and the Snøhvit gas field in the Barents Sea are active carbon capture and storage facilities. Llodra was the world's first offshore facility of the sort, storing about 1 million tons of CO2 per year at a depth of 800 to 1,000 meters below the seafloor. There has been no evidence of leakage so far, and current research projects are assessing the CO2 state to investigate any potential impacts and to predict the long-term destiny of the CO2. The proposed industrial-scale carbon capture and storage will be about 1,000 times higher than what Llodra and Snøhvit currently store. The final waste that I would like to describe briefly is marine litter, which I will then develop through the example of 3 recent case studies. A report produced by UNEP in 2009 describes marine litter as any persistent, manufactured or processed solid material discarded, disposed, or abandoned in the marine and coastal environment. Here I show photos of different litter types collected while trawling during a research cruise in the deep Mediterranean Sea. The first photo shows the variety of the most abundant litter usually found on deep sea floors, which include plastic, glass, and metal. The second photo shows high quantities of clinker, which is the residue of burnt charcoal used in steam engines and commonly collected under shipping routes. And the third photo shows that all types of objects are found far away from the coast, as for example this chair. Litter enters the marine ecosystem through a variety of pathways. The most important sources of marine litter are highly populated coastal areas, including riverine input. Illegal dumping from ships and lost or discarded fishing gear are also important sources of litter. Sporadically, maritime accidents will result in large and localized inputs of litter, including lost cargo from commercial ships. Although dumping litter in marine environment is legally banned by the London Convention, approximately 6.4 million tons of litter are dumped in the oceans every year, of which 635,000 tons are dumped illegally from ships. Litter is observed in almost all scientific seafloor surveys using video and trawls. However, the amount of litter varies in different regions, and only a few dedicated studies have been conducted to estimate the extent of litter accumulation in deep-sea habitats. Impacts of litter on deep-sea habitats and fauna may include suffocation of animals from plastics, release of toxic chemicals from the degradation of materials such as paints and plastics, ingestion of microplastics by sediment feeders, propagation of invasive species, physical damage to sessile fauna such as cold-water corals from discarded fishing gear or other large litter objects, and ghost fishing from lost or discarded nets. In some areas, litter can also have negative effects on economic activities such as fisheries, where nets are broken and target species damaged by litter caught in the fishing gear. Furthermore, marine litter, in particular plastics, may float for a long time in the water column before reaching the seafloor, and chemical contaminants may be transported by currents, creating a particularly difficult management problem. But the distribution, transport, accumulation, and impact of deep-sea litter are poorly quantified on a large geographical scale, and further studies are urgently needed to understand the extent of the problem and develop solutions. So with this, I have finished my attempt to provide a brief overview of the different dumping issues that have affected and are still affecting deep-sea ecosystems. For the second half of this lecture, I will focus on marine litter and will describe the 3 recent case studies that have addressed particular aspects of marine litter distribution, accumulation, and impact. The first case study is based on a paper published by myself and my co-authors in 2013 on the distribution of marine litter in deep Mediterranean seafloor ecosystems. The study was based on samples collected during a national Spanish project called Prometeo and a European project called Biofan between 2008 and 2011. Both projects investigated the biodiversity and functioning of the Mediterranean ecosystems, with Prometeo focusing on the Blanes Canyon, an adjacent slope in the Catalan margin north of Barcelona, and Biofan conducting a trans-Mediterranean cruise that sampled the western, central, and eastern Mediterranean basins. The litter was collected while sampling for benthic megafauna using a knotted trawl and an adhesive trawl. All litter was sorted into 8 categories, including soft and hard plastics, glass, metal, textile, clinker, long lines, and fishing nets. And then the litter was weighed. Here are some examples of litter collected during the Biofan cruise between 1,200 and 3,000 meters depth. All trawls collected marine litter with many plastics, bottles, and tins, as well as other materials such as long lines, tires, or an oil drum. We also collected a discarded or lost fishing net with moribund and dead Herion crabs, providing evidence of ghost fishing. Plastic was the most abundant type of litter and was present in 100% of the samples, mostly in the form of bags and broken bags, but also as hard plastics such as bottles and buckets. We then conducted a GIS spatial analysis of litter distribution and abundance related to both natural and anthropogenic processes. The natural factors considered were currents, river and bathymetry, and the anthropogenic factors were coastal pollution and commercial shipping routes. The results showed that shallower sites closer to the coast have a higher proportion of plastics than deeper sites, suggesting that most litter on the shallower sites had a coastal origin. Deeper sites had mostly heavy litter, with an increase in the proportion of metals and fabric. Heavy litter will sink relatively quickly to the seafloor, and thus this suggests that a large proportion of the litter found in the deeper sites had a ship origin. There was also a good correlation between litter abundance and important shipping routes. This was particularly significant for clinker, the burnt residue of charcoal used by steam engine ships at the end of the 18th century and for 150 years, suggesting that some of the major shipping routes have remained similar in the last 2 centuries. Total litter weight at each site was compared to total biomass of megafauna collected in the same trawls. The first graph shows the data for the open slope adjacent to the Blanes Canyon in the Catalan margin, and the second graph shows the data for the Trans-Mediterranean study. On the Catalan slope, the biomass of megafauna was significantly higher than the weight of litter between 900 and 2000 meters depth. At the deeper stations, the decrease in megafauna and increase in accumulated litter caused a reverse in the trend, with statistically similar megafauna biomass and litter weight. Along the Trans-Mediterranean transect, in the second graph, the proportion of biomass against litter weight varied with area and depth. In most cases, differences between mean biomass and mean litter weight were not significant. Only in the central Mediterranean, at 1,200 meters, biomass was significantly higher than litter weight. The worst scenario was found in the eastern Mediterranean, where the low megafauna abundance results in a reverse trend, with litter being higher than biomass. Here are the main conclusions of our marine litter study in the deep Mediterranean. Litter is present in all sample locations from 900 to 3,000 meters depth across the Mediterranean. The most abundant litter types were plastic, metal, and glass, similar to what has been described in the UNEP MAP MedPol survey in other studies conducted in the Mediterranean. The overall results of our study showed that the accumulation and distribution of marine litter is highly variable within and between sites, and although no clear patterns of accumulation of total litter with geographic area or depth were found, patterns of distribution of the different litter types seem to emerge from the data. The data suggests that litter in the Blanes Canyon, with high proportion of plastics, is predominantly of coastal origin, as plastics can be transported easily downwards by canyon-enhanced currents. On the other hand, most litter sampled on the slope and deep sites was heavy litter, and we suggest that this litter was dumped from ships. There was also a correlation between shipping routes and heavy litter, in particular clinker, suggesting that some major shipping routes have remained similar in the last 2 centuries. Finally, an important result shows that the weight of litter was equivalent to megafauna biomass in several of the studied sites, and in the Eastern Mediterranean, litter weight was higher than megafauna biomass. The second case study is based on a paper by Christopher Pham and co-authors published in early 2014. This study was conducted in the framework of the European project Hermione. Hermione investigated deep sea ecosystems and man's impact on European seas. During Hermione, there was no direct sampling effort for the study of marine litter, but all partners were asked to describe and quantify any observed or collected marine litter during their scientific cruises. The study presented here is the result of a synthesis analysis of all the marine litter data collected during Hermione. 32 sites in the Northeast Atlantic Ocean, Arctic Ocean, and Mediterranean Sea were surveyed, including continental shelves, sedimentary slopes, canyons, seamounts, banks and mounds, the mid-Atlantic ridge, and deep basins down to 4,500 meters depth. The data were obtained from video surveys with ROVs, manned submersibles, and towed cameras, as well as with trawls. This map shows the total litter densities in number of items per hectare in the different locations sampled. Litter was found at all sites, but there was a high variability of litter densities amongst locations. These photos show litter both in situ in photos A, C, D, E, and F, and collected with a trawl in photo B. The most common litter types found were plastic bags, glass bottles, and lost or discarded fishing gear, such as fishing lines and nets. The litter composition varied amongst the studied habitats in deep European waters. Submarine canyons and shelves had statistically similar litter compositions with high proportions of plastic and fishing gear. The accumulation of plastics is probably related to the proximity of the coast in the case of the shelves, and to transport from shelves down canyon by enhanced currents in canyon systems. Ocean ridges and seamounts, banks and mounds were also similar, with the dominance of fishing gear and also high proportion of metal and glass. These are offshore areas with a complex topography that attract both fishers and fishermen. This can explain the high proportion of fishing gear, and also metal and glass are heavy litter, which suggests a ship origin. Finally, litter composition of continental slopes was similar to the basins, with the dominance of plastic and clinker, but also a more even distribution of the different litter types. This suggests that litter found on slopes and deep basins probably has both a coastal and ship origin. The main conclusions of this study show that marine litter was found in all studied sites at the European regional scale from 35 to 4,500 meters depth, and in all habitats sampled, providing further evidence of the widespread of litter in the deep ocean. As in other studies, the most abundant litter type was plastics, followed in this case by glass and fishing gear. Finally, this study shows that although there was a high variability of litter composition amongst habitats, some habitats have significantly similar litter types, and these similarities are probably the result of a combination of natural and anthropogenic factors, including topographic and hydrographic patterns, as well as distance from the shore and the intensity of the fishing activities. The third case study focuses on the most abundant type of marine litter, plastics, and in particular on the degradation of plastics into microplastics and the impact of these microplastics on the benthic fauna. These studies have been conducted by Dr. Kevin Thomas and his colleagues at the Norwegian Institute for Water Research in Norway. This graph shows the steep increase in plastic production since 1950. In orange at the global scale and in blue at the European scale. Polyethylene is the most common plastic and is used in plastic bags and bottles. Plastic degrades slowly. As examples, a fishing net will take approximately 600 years to degrade, a bottle 450 years, a polypropylene cup 50 years, and a plastic bag between 10 and 20 years. And plastic degrades into microplastics, which are particles smaller than 5 millimeters. Microplastics can accumulate in marine systems via runoff from industry and coastal areas and from in situ degradation of plastic litter. Importantly, many of the so-called biodegradable plastics are made with biodegradable materials such as starch, but also leave behind numerous non-degradable plastic fragments. This list is not for detailed description, obviously, but merely to show the variety and number of additives and toxic elements that are added to plastic objects, which, once plastic degrades, will accumulate in the ecosystem. So the main question rising from this research topic concerns the fate of the microplastics after the ingestion by marine organisms, and whether these particles are excreted, bioaccumulated, or even translocated depending on the nature, shape, and size of the plastic particles, the species, and the way of exposure. Some studies with shallow water fauna have shown that microplastics can be accumulated, affecting the physiology of the animal. For example, the ingestion of microplastics by the lungworm affects its feeding activity, while microplastics affect the reproduction and gamete quality of oysters. There are indications also that microplastics can be transferred upwards in the food chain, for example by shore crabs feeding on mussels that have accumulated microplastics and thus can have an impact on human health. However, studies in deep sea are practically non-existent and are urgently needed. The conclusions of this study show that the production and use of plastics has increased drastically since the mid-20th century, and these plastics include toxic additives, which, when the plastic degrades, are released into the ecosystem. The resulting microplastics and toxic elements accumulate in the habitat and fauna, and it has been shown that microplastics can affect physiological processes such as feeding and reproduction. Also, it has been shown that microplastics can be transferred in the trophic chain of shallow water systems, which could potentially impact human health. So the question left for us is, what can we do to reverse the trend in ocean pollution? The accumulation of marine litter and pollution in deep sea ecosystems is an increasing issue that has been recognized by governments, the research community, and increasingly society. The deep ocean is the largest ecosystem on Earth and one of the least studied because of its remoteness and difficulty in accessing it. Thus, cleaning the deep ocean from litter is not a realistic solution. The effort has to be made in drastically reducing the arrival of litter to marine systems. There is no single solution for this problem, but a combination of societal and governmental actions are urgently needed. Some of the processes that will help reducing the accumulation of litter in the marine systems include the education from very early ages, at home and in schools, to explain the importance of keeping our streets, forests, fields and beaches clean, and the importance of recycling. This will help reduce the accumulation of litter on land systems that will ultimately reach the sea. As an example, the image on this slide shows the front cover of a very successful book on marine litter produced as a collaboration of the European project Hermione and the international program INDEEP, the International Network for Investigations of Deep Sea Ecosystems. This book, produced for children, was translated into 6 languages and given to schools around the world that successfully use it in their classes. Also, we all have to consciously reduce the use of plastics when possible, for example, when shopping, and governments should work with industry to reduce packaging products. Governments and international organizations have recognized the pressing issue of marine litter and will continue to develop actions such as, for example, the European Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which includes marine litter as one of its indicators for good environmental status, or, for example, UNEP's Global Marine Litter Program. Finally, dedicated research projects to investigate the distribution, accumulation, and impact of marine litter and chemical pollution are essential to fully understand the problem and develop solutions. So thank you for your attention, and I hope that you can share with your colleagues and friends and family the concerns of marine litter and pollution.